Well, hey there, sport. I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. And also that this is going to be kind of a weird episode because we're talking about sainted singers and professional pirates and all kind of things that got to do with being a dad. So come on, Chief, and let's talk about fatherhood here on Created Things.
Hello and welcome to Created Things. I'm your co-host, medievalist-ish, Catholic priest, ! Father Gabriel Toretta. With me is artist and psychotherapist, also co-host, Jacob Flores Popchek. We bring you today the world's finest podcast. I'm afraid I can't say the only, but the finest podcast, proudly sponsored by The Dad Bod. How are you, Jacob?
I'm well, and I am definitely dad bodied. I'm wearing a tank top right now. My guts hanging out. I got big hipster glasses. I got
so
skinny
beautiful.
little chicken legs. You know, I'm the full package, baby.
Technically speaking, though, Jacob, is there anything different? What would you say has changed about what you just described between you being a dad as of 2 weeks running, 3 weeks running, and you not being one?
If anything, I've lost weight.
I could see it. I could see it.
I have lost weight as a dad, and I hope that this continues. I'm a fan of it, personally speaking.
That's incredible. But then you get the sweet dad bod thing that picks up later when like dad has to be the one who cleans up everybody's plates.
See, that's what I'm terrified of.
This is
because I know that that's already my tendency, and I'm terrified of facing that.
Oh, it's so beautiful. My eldest brother has 3 kids, and they're wonderful, and he's such a good dad, and it's really, really beautiful. And he has picked this up so hard. Like he'll sort of like he's picked this up so hard. He just like, you know, the kids will be done eating and he's so great. I mean, like, you know, and his wife will make like lovely food for them, or like he like really fell in love with making them breakfast, and so he'll make them these really elaborate breakfasts that are like definitely partly exercising the demons of like bad breakfasts for us as kids. But like they like amazing breakfast. Of course, kids are kids, and so they'll eat like a few bites, you know, enough like actually to keep body and soul together, and that's about it. And then they'll like run off. So he'll just like eat the rest of it every day. It's so great.
You got to be careful, man. I trust that, you know, so we're talking about fatherhood today on this podcast. And I kind of trust that although there will be many points of comparison between the monastic and sort of spiritual fatherhood that you practice and the more literal biological fatherhood that I practice, I do trust that one of them will not be this, that there is no one in your priory who eats all the food that the other priests and brothers leave behind.
So
at the end of the day,
I live in a priory that's mostly priors in their like 80s and 90s. It's really beautiful guys who
it matches your whole vibe, so it works.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I'm essentially I am bald, bearded, and old. So there it is. But you know, we talked last episode about how like, you know, babies, they're adorable. Everyone loves them and they should love them, but they are also kind of a hot mess. Old men, also adorable. Everyone should love them. Very much a hot mess. I cannot think of a possible world in which I would clean the plate of any of the guys in my house. It's like, I think I just got hepatitis C. Or maybe
that's amazing.
I got like a couple of A's, a B, and a C. I'm not really sure.
Get the whole hep alphabet soup here going on.
Yeah, suffice to say, I'm not going to touch any of these things. These guys are great. I love them. They've done good work for the church. I'm not going to eat something that they put their mouths on.
Yeah, I don't blame them. I mean, and in that sense, there is great similarity with babies. Like, why the hell would you eat anything that a baby has eaten? It is disgusting. It is probably covered in all manner of bacterium and demonic entities.
But you're going to do it. You say you don't right now, but that's because your baby doesn't eat solid food. You're gonna.
Yeah. Oh, sweet summer child. What do you know of fear? Oh boy. Well, we are talking about fatherhood today. I really enjoyed our conversation, our last conversation on babies and kind of connecting that as a higher art form and kind of connecting the artistic process to the raising of babies. But it left, we were sort of talking about it in a generalized way, and it does, that conversation I think leaves something to be desired in terms of a conversation I've honestly been wanting to have for you, or with you, not for you, for a really long time, about fatherhood itself. Because there's a lot of, just speaking as a psychotherapist, there's a lot of bullshit out there about what fatherhood should be, about what it is, about what it isn't, from basically everywhere. I'm not just being that sort of conservative Christian guy who's being, oh, the secular world has bad ideas about fatherhood, right? I'm also very much saying, like, there are a lot of rampantly toxic and terrible ideas within our little segment of the world of, whether you want to call it Catholics or artists or, wherever you fall in the Venn diagram, you've got some, wherever you fall, you probably have some really toxic ideas about fatherhood.
Yay!
Or have been exposed to them. Obviously, this is relevant to us as artists because I think, stereotypically speaking, most artists have pretty bad relationship with their dads. And I also think that this is a conversation I wanted to have with you for a while because you are a priest and we call you father. And I've never actually had a conversation with a priest, nor frankly do I think I've ever heard a priest talk about this, about what it's like to be a dad in that way.
Right.
And as I'm, we were talking about in the babies episode, I'm a brand new dad. My son was born only a matter of weeks ago. It's my first child. And I'm sort of experiencing and deconstructing ideas about fatherhood and, both good and bad and my own experience of my dad in regards to my son and in good ways and in, healthy ways and all these kinds of things. And it just made it even more acute that I wanted to have that conversation with you. So building on our conversation about babies and parenting as art form, I thought narrowing that down to be this kind of paternalistic convo might be really, really a cool thing.
Yeah. I think that's really great. Because it is true. I think even for priests to think about it is an interesting thing because, on Father's Day, every year, there's this strange thing that happens once you're ordained, which is that people start, like texting you or to be like, hey, happy Father's Day. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. Which is like, oh, okay. Yes. Okay, good.
I remember doing that as a little kid, like wishing my pastor happy Father's Day and like sort of the look of surprise on his face that a little kid was wishing him happy Father's Day.
Yeah, totes. Yeah, that would be really surprising.
And my feeling of surprise that he was surprised by that, where I'm just like, of course he should. Of course he should be wished this. Like, what the heck is he surprised by?
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really great. I think that's really great. I think one place I'd like to start with this is with probably my favorite painting by Caravaggio, actually.
Oh, rad. Going hard with the art. Let's start with the art, buddy.
Yeah. So he has this painting, The Rest on the Flight into Egypt. I had this incredible privilege that my last year before I was ordained, in fact, right before I was ordained, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, I think, or the Women's Museum, what was it? Anyway, a museum in DC, a smaller museum, put this big, beautiful exhibit of, it's called Picturing Mary, of just a bunch of stuff, images of Mary and stuff that was like beautifully curated by this wonderful priest in Milan, who's from New Jersey. Don't be distracted.
Stopping for a water break.
It's just building dramatic tension, And one of the pieces that they were able to display was this Rest on the Flight into Egypt, which is very rarely moved out of, I think it's from Milan. I think it's in Milan. And it's really big. It's maybe like 6 or 8 feet across, something like that. So it fills, most of the wall that they put it on. And it's just this splendid image where on the right is Mary sort of resting on the ground. She's seated. She's sort of collapsed and has fallen asleep, holding the Christ child, who is, I was thinking about bringing this up when we were talking about babies, because it's one of the only paintings of like Mary and child where like she's really a mother and he's really a child. Like his cheeks are red, like you can tell that he's just been breastfeeding, and he just looks like he's an age appropriate baby, you know. And so he's asleep and she is clearly fallen asleep, like holding him, and her clothes are a little bit disarray, so she's clearly just finished nursing him. Because the idea, right, is on the flight into Egypt, they just rushed out, and that everything's in a sort of a panic, and that they're exhausted. And like in the distance, you can see kind of like waste, you know, because they're on their way into Egypt, and so it's sort of a desert waste-ish. And on the left-hand side, this is very prominent, kind of hilariously prominent, cow, which is hilarious, or ox or something. But anyway, but seated is, on the left-hand side of the painting, is Saint Joseph. And he's old. This is one of the old, so Saint Joseph can be depicted either old or young, depending on what historical devotional strand you're drawing your text from, but artistically he's often depicted fairly old. So he's this old man, and he looks exhausted, and he's completely wearied, and he's not touching Mary. He's sort of, she's on the right, he's on the left. But he looks exhausted, but he's awake. And what he's doing is he's holding out in front of him sheet music. And the reason he's holding out sheet music is because the whole radiant, luminous explosion in the center of the image, the thing that unites Mary and Jesus and Joseph, is an angel playing the viol as a lullaby to lull Mary and Christ to sleep.
So Joseph is assisting the angel.
Joseph is holding sheet music for the angel to play, as that to lull Mary and Joseph, to lull Mary and Jesus to sleep. And I love everything about this. Like everything about this. I just think it's like it's one of the most perfect pieces of art I've ever seen. It's this perfect expression of the supernatural and the natural, like family, motherhood and fatherhood, spousal relationship, all of this. And in it, there's this really particularly profound, I think, insight into the nature of fatherhood. And something that I think you could say is also, you could adapt in a way that's really given as a way to talk about priestly fatherhood. Because what's strange about this image is that, like, I mean, he's not doing anything useful. If you were thinking about like cheap late 20th and early 21st century stereotypes of a man, you know, he's not like, what are the things that people say, like provider, protector? There's these three things people say that this is a kind of like a
provocateur.
The provocateur. This is kind of like Catholic is like Catholic thought world of like certain modes.
Yeah, and very much like Catholic pop bullshit kind of.
Yeah. So it's just a kind of contemporary pop psychology thing for Catholics, whatever. So, you know, he's not like providing, he's not protecting, he's not being useful, he's not like working with his hands, he's not like being strong and silent, he's not like doing whatever, like any kind of thing that you would think, any kind of cheap stereotype of like, this is what a father is like, or this is what a man is like a real man is like. He's exhausted. He is just as tired as they are. In fact, because in this image, he's older, he's going to be more tired than they are. And he's awake. He's forcing himself to be awake so that he can make of what he is doing like an angelic praise. you know, that this is like an angelic praise of Mary and of Jesus, and that this is the way in which he gives them what they most need. That like he has, you know, this is Jesus Christ, God taking human flesh, and this is Mary immaculately conceived and, you know, perfect in every way. Like, what do they need? You know, well, they need to sleep, and what he can give them in love is he can help them to sleep. And this in this context is a radiant hymn of like celestial praise. It's his particular way of living, like the eternal praise of God in the heavens is just like be there, be suffering with them, be exhausted, and to be the one to make sure that they sleep, you know, and that they can recover.
Which absolutely builds on everything we were saying in our babies episode about joining with the baby in empathy and just like being with and walking with. And it also means a lot to me on a personal level because, you know, I am just a few weeks into my fatherhood, my literal fatherhood. And, you know, there's not realistically much I can do right now in terms of pop psych capitalistic ideas of usefulness, right? I mean, I'm of course washing dishes and changing diapers and all these sorts of things, but these aren't things that I couldn't hire someone to do if I had the money. You know what I mean? There's something special about me doing those things. But the thing that I'm doing that I feel is special is that I'm walking around on average an hour and a half a night carrying my baby and singing songs to him. And I, because it's me and we're both good medieval boys, I'm singing mainly bardcore because those are the only lullabies I actually know. And he loves Jocko Hazeldean, which is this really beautiful Scottish song that's like the motif of the lovers running away together the night before she's proposed to some big ugly guy. But it's like pretty much the only version of that where they actually escape and they don't just drown themselves romantically together in a river.
Oh, but it's so romantic.
And he really likes it. And just this idea of, you know, tirelessly, but also very tiredly walking in circles as he looks at the light and just listens to the song until he passes out. I don't know. That's really meaningful to me to hear. It's really relevant.
Yeah. No, I think it's really splendid. And I think like, what is there about, for thinking about this as like the sacramental fatherhood, like the priestly fatherhood. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot that I would want to say, but that this is a life given. This is a life given to in service to Jesus Christ, and so in service to the Blessed Mother, and that like. That's, I mean, there were time periods when the sort of like liege lord, like, you know, I am the knight and this is my queen, you know, was very helpful mental imagery. But, you know, since that's not intuitive mental imagery for us anymore, I don't mean service in that kind of like, you know, oh, knight or like, or still less kind of like hired hand kind of way like we'd mean it now. But I mean that like he's giving his whole life to just like hold up a piece of sheet music so that like God can praise himself with the angels, and that's not done like theoretically, but it's done concretely. That's what's so splendid about this painting, is that everything is so concrete. It gets real. That what's important about this is it's happening here, you know, on the earth. Like he is enabling this to happen. Like he is enabling God's praise of himself on the earth, that like the celestial praise of Jesus Christ is being sung on the earth because of what Joseph is doing. And it's that sweetness of like earth beginning to sing heaven's praises that is what that's the peace in which Mary and Jesus rest, you know?
And something's sort of hitting me that has not come to bear yet, but I think I would not be surprised if this is I won't make it inorganically so, but I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes a theme that we return to over and over again in this episode. But this idea of dad dadhood, which I want to say dadhood because I feel fatherhood is so burdened down with this kind of pop bullshit that you're talking about. But this idea of dadhood as having something fundamental to do with sort of singing the song of creation to your kid, and like being very intentional about which song you're singing, and recognizing that you're just singing a song that he's supposed to, or he or she, I mean, he in my case is going to be kind of like learning the steps to and coming up with his own dance to. Maybe, you know, you're singing a song and it's the kid's job to come up with their own dance to it. And I don't know, these themes are already sort of hitting me, but I'll let them come to bear organically. You mentioned this whole idea of I want to cut back to something you said before, this whole idea of being wished Happy Father's Day and the jarringness of that. My first moment were, I mean, obviously I was a dad from the moment my kid was conceived, right? And I believe, as kind of, as we've talked about, especially in the episode on lilies, you know, I, as a student of theology of the body, definitely see my fatherhood in its potentiality just being like fundamental to my identity as a man, my, you know, born as a man. From the moment I was conceived as male, I had in me my identity as also a father, and anything I did up to this point, any way in which I loved a friend, any way which I loved you as my friend, any woman I dated, any project I oversaw, any art I made, was being made in some level out of my fatherhood, if only fatherhood in potentiality. But without talking about that too extensively now, the first moment I felt like a dad, despite all the other times I've been a dad, despite being a dad when I held my kid and everything, first time I felt like a dad was just going to the grocery store with my son.
Secret's out.
We were alone.
Yeah, there it is.
We were alone.
Can't keep this inside anymore. Yeah.
And I was just like holding my baby, and I was like showing him what a lemon was. And I'm like holding my baby and I'm showing him what a cookie is. And I'm showing him what shrimps are, you know, and I'm just walking kind of through the store and I'm like, holy shit, this is what being a dad is. Like right now in this grocery store, just bouncing this little kid around. His eyes are like searching around. He's seen this big yellow thing for the first time and he won't really know what it is for another 5 years. Right. Like this is actually what being a dad is. And I'm curious, to cut back to your whole thing about Father's Day. What was the first moment you felt like a dad? When you, after you became a priest, was there a single moment where you were like, oh crap, I'm like actually a dad now, either in terms of like the responsibility that flowed over you and the fear that came out of that, or in kind of a good, warm feeling? I'm just curious, and I don't want you to have to make up something if it didn't happen, but I'm just curious if it did.
Yeah. Not that I can think of as like a single moment like that, you know. I mean, it is certainly like strange where, because it suddenly becomes a title that you're given, you know. I mean, so like when you're, you know, when your wife has a child, people they'll use it as an appellation, you know. They'll say like, okay, dad, like, you know, this, you know, but like basically the only person who calls you dad is like your son. I mean, he doesn't right now because, you know, slow to develop. But what's strange, one thing that's strange about it is that like, right away, right, people start calling you father. And especially when you're just brand spanking new or newly ordained, they make a big point of it because like they're excited and you're excited and they want to emphasize that like something has changed, you know, so they use this name now. Which is just something new, you know, and like learning to hear that as your name and learning to understand it and like not be afraid of it, you know, is its own kind of thing. You know, I think priests can sometimes shock, be a little bit uncomfortable with themselves and like insist either kind of be scared of the title and you know, like, oh, don't call me father, call me Bob, you know, like Father Bob was my dad. Oh wait, right. awkward I hope he wasn't.
But sort of that stereotype of like the teacher who walks in and like, I'm throwing the textbook in the bin, you guys, I'm not teaching You're teaching me.
You're teaching
man.
me. It's like,
We're gonna learn
boy.
respect for ourselves, the power of hip hop. Shakespeare was the first rapper. You know, like this kind of bullshit.
Wait a second. It sounds autobiographical. Yeah, exactly. So, and then also people can be like a little bit too obsessed, you know, about like everybody who ever interacts with me from this moment forward will call me Father X, you know, regardless of who it might be and regardless of what the context might be. And like that too is something, frankly, that you have to get used to, because there's a humility in learning to recognize, like, you know, this is an ascription, like it's a title that's given to you culturally as a sign of honor, and as a naming of a real reality, but that like at its best, it's a gift of love from the person who proposes it, and that like there's a challenge to live it that way too, as like this isn't just a title that I'm insisting on, or a title that I'm insisting on not insisting on, as the case may be, but like I actually want to live in a genuinely like generative way, like live in a genuinely like fatherly, paternal, loving way.
That's a title I want to live up to.
Yeah, and I want to like live up to and live out of, you know. So, which is something really beautiful, you know. Like as a graduate student, I often don't like among my peers and stuff, I don't use the title. I just think it, yeah, in certain academic context, I think it could just be confusing. But that doesn't mean it's any less, you know, what it is. And there are some of my peers who want to use it anyway. And that's beautiful, because for them, it's an expression of their respect for who I am and who I am, like objectively as offered to them, you know, as a person. And that's really beautiful. Like it's
who you exist as in relationship with them.
Yeah, exactly. But as you say, it's something, there's this beautiful sense of like it being something that I can live out of, and as a result sort of live up to, you know, that there's there's beauty proposed here. Yeah. So it's interesting. I don't know that I can point to like a specific moment just shortly after my ordination where I could say like, oh yeah, it's that kind of thing. Or like I had this big moment of like, wow, this is what it means to be like a father now in this mode. But certainly like looking back, sort of rapidly, even looking back, you can just see, it becomes easy to understand the way in which like this life is given, you know, Christ talks about in the Gospel of John, like I came that you might have life and life more abundant. And like this is this great definition of like you know, living as a father for a man or living as a mother for a woman, you know, is that like by the life that I live, like other people can live and live more abundantly. You know, that like you generate life in another. And that then becomes really beautiful to see, the way in which like just sort of me being who I am and whatever has been able to like generate life in other people. That is profoundly wonderful and profoundly humbling, you know?
Yeah, no, it is. It's interesting though when you say, you know, you're okay to let go of the title when you think that's appropriate. You're okay people refer to you as the title, because I think it speaks to two things. I mean, it speaks to ontologically the fact that you're a dad no matter what. Like you don't have to be called dad to be a dad. Right.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And that's cool because it gets at what I think the fatal flaw is, and maybe it'd be good to deconstruct some of these things even in this conversation today, although I didn't explicitly set out to do so. It gets at the heart of what I find problematic about things like protector, provider. Don't know
whatever
what
the third one was.
Provocateur.
Yeah, provocateur. Yeah, definitely provocateur.
Right. Which often actually does turn out to be the third one for guys who actually believe that. But I think it speaks to the kind of the core fragility behind desiring to believe in some of those things, which is really not knowing what the identity of being a dad means, and really knowing that it means something deep and wanting to find something to fill that observed chasm with. And when you talk about these priests who either insist on everyone calling them father no matter what, versus the guy who insists on not insisting it. It seems like that to me is the clerical equivalent of this existential struggle to find provider and bugga bullshit, all that in dadhood, because it's ultimately this discomfort with, I don't know what this thing is. So I'm either going to ignore it, or I'm going to like harp on it in a scrupulous way that actually doesn't make any sense because I don't actually know what's underneath it. So I'm just going to stress its importance without exploring it, or I'm going to come up with my own meaning, which are all ultimately like, it reminds me in this very Catholic way of the stories we hear in the Bible about approaching the Holy of Holies in the temple, right? In the Jewish temple. And I don't know what the hell's in there. So I'm nervous, and sometimes I'm going to respond to that with scrupulosity, and sometimes I'm just going to not go in there at all. And there's this aura of mystery around it. And if I do go in there, I have to have a rope tied around my waist because I'm encountering God the Father, and that scares the living shit out of me. And so I'm going to kind of fill it in with my own weirdness. I'm going to fill that gap in with my own weirdness. And philosophically, it seems like all the kinds of discomforts, whether it's the provider, protector thing, or whether it's the don't call me father, I'm just Bob thing, I think might sort of be the equivalent of that towards our own identity of fatherhood. We're afraid to enter that temple space. And so we come up with what might be in there, or we deny that there's anything there at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you kind of want to simplify it. Yeah, it's the most important things we kind of tend to want to simplify so that we feel like we can grab a hold of them and like grapple with them and figure them out more easily, which works for a little while, but it's just in the end, of course, it sort of fails because the reality is bigger than that. And so I'm just now living by some artificial thing that I've made up, which is actually, like, you could say, a very profound inversion of the way that art actually works, which is to say that I make a created thing that testifies to something that is greater than itself. That's what a work of art should be able to do, however big the thing is, or however, whatever, like that I've made something that's by definition like less than I am because I've made it and all this, but it testifies to something greater and gives a way that people can like access it and enter into it and see it themselves, experience it themselves. And that's very beautiful. The inverse temptation about like the greatest things in our lives is to like make something very small that keeps the bigger thing at bay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, of course, with fatherhood, there's going to be a big temptation to do that because the thing is so big and it's relational by its definition, right? And so it's hard to like, you can't just like put onto a board all of its characteristics and all of its elements, like it takes its meaning and its life from its relationality. And so like all that stuff can be kind of scary. And so it's sort of just easier to pin things down and make them small. And, whether it's the stereotype of the Japanese businessman who's like, well, I'm just gonna like work all day and like I'll show my kids that I love them that way. Or whether it's kind of overly fetishizing any one aspect of being a father or whatever. Like it's just, in the end, it's going to come to the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to think, if I'm being honest, you posed this really beautiful, like Caravaggio work as a good artistic starting point. And I'm an idiot because I didn't actually consider any art that's influential to my idea of fatherhood. And so even as we're talking, I'm sort of racking my brain trying to think, surely there must be some. I have a few that I'm sort of self-conscious about. But I think all the ones that I'm coming to are ones, they're mostly folk tales and things like this that I was exposed to very young. Like Pinocchio comes to mind, right? This idea of, and there's obviously, if you read, Carlo Collodi's original Pinocchio, there's obviously an allusion being made to Michelangelo.
Oh, interesting.
In the character of Geppetto, where And Geppetto's always depicted as old, and there's absolutely no reason to depict him as old. And just the same way that you're talking about with St. Joseph and the Caravaggio thing, for some reason, people just assume that if you're celibate, you have to be old, right? Like Joseph is celibate, so everyone must be old. He just must not have a sex drive. And Geppetto isn't married, so obviously he just must be old and you know, a widower or something. But you know, Michelangelo famously, you know, would describe how the statue is inside the marble.
Right.
And he just carves away the marble to discover it. And this is actually the story of Pinocchio, right? He doesn't seek to create a boy. He hears a block of wood crying out to him. And in kind of a panic, just starts carving away the wood. And inside is this little wooden boy.
Oh, that's beautiful. I didn't know that.
And that to me speaks volumes and spoke volumes to me as a kid. And then, of course, because if you read the original Pinocchio, I mean, it's considered by many people to be one of the last epic poems kind of ever written. And Pinocchio, it's super moralistic in this 20th century, early 20th century kind of hardcore, scrupulous Catholic way. And Pinocchio sins by becoming an actor. Oh
no, actor sinning.
Which is it's just the sin of lying and deceit. and Geppetto goes out and chases him and has to sacrifice himself to be swallowed by the whale. And there are all these, you know, very sort of Geppetto's God, obviously, right? And coming to be with us and rescue us. But what I love in that, and what I love in Michelangelo's art too, is that there's this posture of humility for Michelangelo with his art, and with Geppetto towards his son. There's this posture of humility where I'm not making this. It's already in there and I'm just kind of revealing it. That to me is very central to fatherhood, to the fatherhood of St. Joseph, as you describe it in the Caravaggio painting, to the fatherhood of Geppetto, to my fatherhood, to your fatherhood, which is, I think we run into trouble when we think we're forming our kids, that we're building our kids, where what I'm doing is I'm sort of chipping away to reveal who my son really is. And I'm actively discovering that. In other words, I'm a servant of his identity rather than the creator of it. And I like the idea of God as that. I mean, obviously God is creator. I'm not denying God is creator in a podcast called Created Things, but I also think there is something to the identity of God there when Pope St. John Paul II says, you know, families become who you are.
Right.
This idea of you already are this thing. Let's just chip away the sawdust until you are more it, you know, and that's what I hope I'm doing with my son, even though he's only a few weeks old, this side of the womb. And, I think that's what I'm trying to do when I'm doing an artwork, when I'm creating an artwork. I kind of try to treat it like it's already there, and I'm just serving it by helping it, by pushing it along, you know, and helping it become more what it already is. And I don't know. I think that might be key to this idea of fatherhood, and not taking it too far in terms of I'm molding my kid, but also not taking the step back in terms of being the stereotypical Japanese businessman who's just totally uninvolved. Whether you are a priest with your congregation or whether you're a biological or adoptive dad, being able to say, hey, I'm here to reveal something. I'm here to reveal something about my congregation, my biological child, the Eucharist, the Messiah, if I'm St. Joseph, right? And that's all I'm here for. Right.
That's great. I have specific thoughts on this, so you have to bring me back to this. But first, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a word from our sponsors, which is indeed. So Created Things is brought to you by Catholic Creatives. It's an organization dedicated to igniting a new renaissance of faith through prayer and beauty and the creative spirit. And they do so by connecting and supporting and promoting artists and innovators and makers and storytellers from across the faith. But as you can imagine, it takes a community to bring those big ideas to life. So by supporting Catholic Creatives on Patreon, you not only help our podcast here, but you contribute directly to future workshops and summits and resources and outreaches meant to support Catholic artists throughout the country. So would really encourage you to become a Patreon member, even if you give a small amount or whatever. It's a beautiful thing, helping to make this kind of new renaissance a reality.
Haven't got a hey penny.
That's right.
If you haven't got a penny, a hey penny will do.
You got a
Just give
hey
small
penny,
amount.
it'll do. So you can go to catholiccreatives.org/support. And also you can visit catholic.store. It's one of those cool, like, new domain endings that's not like .net CF 1998 or .com but .store. It's super great. Anyway, there it is. Don't
go to catholic.gov because that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, don't do that. That turns out that lays out a whole blueprint for like a theocratic thing, and I don't know, it's just sitting there. Everybody could look at it, but we're not doing it. Anyway, it's very complicated.
But catholic.store, definitely go there.
Go there. Yeah, they got stuff. If you need stuff that other people have and you don't want to like break and enter, this is the best way to do it.
And I am actually behind the scenes working on some designs that we're going to be selling in the official Created Things store. So soon you're going to be able to pick those up.
That's so hot.
At Catholic.store. So definitely check that out and support local Catholic artists.
This is an important thing because when I was able to go to, I think it was the second summit, Catholic Creative Summit, that was in Dallas. And I was there just to support Jacob, who was presenting at it. And I was able to be there for just about an hour, but it was really cool. And of course, I discovered that I knew like half the people there because it's really great. It's a really cool community. And of course, I was there in my habit, but under my habit, close to my chest, I was wearing this T-shirt that Jacob had made for me from the Frassati Fellowship. Yes.
This is how Father Gabriel and I met. We met at like a young adults group that he was running at a city in Cincinnati. I just moved there. I didn't know a damn soul. And I went to this thing that was excessively like, guys, I can't even tell you how weird the pitch for this whole thing was. The pitch was that this is the Frassati Fellowship. It's a young adults ministry. And someone called Father Gabriel Toretta is going to be leading a series called Illustrated Heretics, where every week he's going to introduce you to a heretic and he's going to show you a bunch of paintings and arts by artists from everywhere, from the Renaissance to the modern age to storybooks to everything. And you're going to get to guess
who the heretics
the person
are.
Who made it was a heretic or not, and believed in that heresy of the day or not. And I was like, this is the most bananas thing I've ever heard. This is going to be crazy. And I went, and it was so wonderful. And I met every friend that I still have in my life, including Father Gabriel there. And I made you this T-shirt.
Yeah. And so he made this T-shirt and it was absolutely amazing. And I have worn it actually apart. It has, all the design has fallen apart. Not, gentle listener, because it was cheap, but because I have worn it a lot. But I do occasionally wash my clothes. So this is good because I too am in need of new swag. So I too can go to Catholic.store, apparently.
I didn't know your design had fallen apart. I can make you a new T-shirt, dude. I can send you a new one.
What? How would this?
If the design has fallen apart, I can do this.
Well, it's technically true. These things are possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
But speaking of designing, back to Pinocchio.
Yeah, back to Pinocchio. We were saying something that I wanted to go back to, which is
I was talking about like revealing the thing as opposed to
this is something really that's wonderful, because I think one of the big ways in which like priestly fatherhood manifests or becomes apparent in a way that one can experience.
No pun intended. Apparent.
Apparent. Actually, dad puns are an important part of this whole situation. So I nearly promised them at the beginning, but I wasn't sure I could deliver. But thank you for delivering for me.
You're welcome.
New dad powers hashtag. A lot of it actually is by like removing crud. And I don't just mean in the confessional, although of course that's splendid and really beautiful, but a lot of it is by just removing crud, like people get like all this just junk around their minds about like who God is and like what they have to do to be good Christians, and like, or if they're not very sold on who God is or whatever, like that God doesn't seem very great, and like and all of this. And so a lot of what a priest does that I think is genuinely fatherly is like helping people to kind of like sometimes very gently, sometimes more roughly, kind of trying to match to what the person needs, like show them like, are you aware that like you've got a bunch of like crap all over you that like you can't really move very well because like all of your joints are encased in this like gross, gunky, waxy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of that? And then like, would you like to get rid of it? Because we could if you wanted to. And I think that's really beautiful. It's really beautiful work, actually. And that is honestly a ton of what being a priest is about, is like removing or helping people to see that they can let go of things that they have falsely learned, that they have wrongly learned, and things that they have learned that were wrong. And to like propose, like to take away all the junk, to begin to let people see how beautiful Jesus Christ is. You know?
There's this beautiful scene in the movie The Mission, which is one of these. There's sort of like a collection of movies that most Catholics really, really like because they happen to be very insightful and flattering to Catholicism and are actually well made, which is a rarity. And one of those is weirdly The Princess Bride, but another one of those is The Mission. St. John Paul II said The Princess Bride was his favorite movie. But the other one is The Mission, and it's ahistorical, but it's based on real types of events that happened, and it's about this, I believe, a Jesuit missionary.
I think so. I've not seen it, actually, believe it or not.
To the jungles of Latin America, and there is this conquistador played by Robert De Niro who has been butchering the natives, and does not believe in God, and only believes in coin and all these kinds of things. And he is at some point converted to Christianity by our lead priest character, but can't give up his shame, and decides to self-impose a penance where he's going to tie all of the weapons he used to colonize the natives and murder them to like a rope attached to his back and just pull them around for the rest of his life. And that this weight and pain is going to be a constant reminder of his sin. And there is a point at which the priest and the natives are trying to escape a violent force that's coming to kill all of them. And the poor conquistador in his shame is walking with them, and he is dragging behind as they try to climb up this mountain to get to the other side of the valley. And he's not going to make it. Like, you can tell he's having a heart attack. You can tell he's not going to make it over the side of this mountain. And the priest just gets pissed off and pulls out a machete and just chops the rope and throws all the armor over the side into the river, and basically just says, like, your sins are forgiven. Let's go.
It's so awesome.
And I deeply reminded of that scene as you talk about this, because there's an editing process, right? There's a paring down process. But I also want to clarify, because this is something that I encounter a lot as a therapist. There's also this really toxic and dangerous, but true stereotype, because stereotypes are always based on a truth, of fatherhood, where dads are always just the guy who says no, and the guy who is reductive and says no and takes things away and grounds you and spanks you, and really, I think, leads to a lot of the father wounds that many of us have. And what I would say is the difference between that very toxic version of fatherhood and what you and I are talking about right now, and I wonder if you would agree with me on this, but is that what we're talking about right now is not just saying no for saying no's sake, or because the things are bad. We're not cutting away the wood to reveal Pinocchio primarily because the wood is bad. And we're not throwing the armor over the side of the river because the armor did anything particularly wrong, right? We're doing it because we're wanting to reveal how good the thing is inside of that wood. And we don't want anything to distract from it because we love it so much. And so if I'm saying no to my kid because I'm going, oh man, I would love for you to have this thing that you're asking for, buddy, but you just deserve so much better than that. And I really want to help you find something that's going to meet that need, but in a happier and holier way that's going to like really fulfill you better than the thing you're asking for. That is the fatherhood of the sculptor. That is the fatherhood of Geppetto or St. Joseph or the priest from the mission, where if I'm just like, no, that's bad. I would argue that's sort of a satanic parody of what you and I are talking about right here.
Yeah, and also like oftentimes the fact you're saying yes, you know, like you're whatever, you're trying to clear away that people think that things are unattractive that are actually attractive. I mean, like this is the whole reality of like evangelizing, like preaching the gospel is just like, I'm not trying to sell anybody on anything, or to get them to give up their team and join my team. That's all nonsense, you know. It's just that like Jesus Christ is the beauty of all beautiful things, and I would love it if you could see that, you know. And like I try to see that, and like I kind of want to see that together. And if there's some reason that you can't see that, let's talk about it and see how we can see it better, you know?
And this is something I think people don't understand about Catholicism. Most Catholics don't understand this about Catholicism, but this is my experience of Catholicism, that morality, all sin, all definition of sin really does come down to essentially less than you deserve, right? I mean, even the word sin is a version of the term to miss the mark, right? That's the etymological root of this. And
no, I don't know.
And the idea of missing the mark, or telling the person, hey, like this isn't exactly like what you deserve. This is you're settling, whether you're stealing or whether you're murdering or whether you're adultering or you're using pornography or you're lying or whatever it happens to be. It's not sinful because it's arbitrarily bad. It's sinful because ultimately it is less than you deserve. And when you're talking about Jesus as the beautiful thing of all beautiful things, I mean, of course he is. And I'm not trying to divinize my kid, but I just hope that I'll be able to parent that way, where I'm able to say to my sons constantly, and I'm kind of tearing up as I say it, but I'm just hoping I'll be able to say to him, like, you are the beautiful thing of beautiful things. And I don't want you to settle for any less than that. I don't want you to do that thing over there. I want you to do this other thing over here, because I want you to see how special you are.
Yeah.
And I wish people understood that about being dads. I wish people understood that about their heavenly Father, and that he wants to do the same thing. I wish people understood that's what Catholicism is supposed to look like, because it so often doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think that's really beautiful. The yeah. Cormac McCarthy is not an author that most people would associate very strongly with like sentimentality or anything. He's a very brutal author. All of his books involve like brutal murders, most of them knife fights, and one of them a rather large amount of cannibalism. And he's a sort of he's a Catholic atheist, you know. So he was raised Catholic, but sort of practices Catholic atheism. And
you can take the atheist out of the Catholicism, but you can't take the Catholicism out of the atheist.
You really can't. And in his book The Road, which is a really, really, really beautiful book for people who have a very high, very, very high tolerance for the eating of people. It's a very violent book, but he has this incredible line, because like McCarthy is just this really rich thinker, and he's trying to. There's this scene, for instance, where like so it's like a post-apocalyptic. It doesn't matter the context, but it's post-apocalyptic, and there's just a man and his son, and they don't have names. It's just a man and his son, and at one point they're on the beach, and the son finds like a flare gun, and he just shoots the flare into the air. And he said, and the father says, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "I don't know, just maybe so that somebody could see it." And he said, "Who? God?" And he says, "Yeah, God." It's very beautiful. Wow. Just like he wants to, like, some sign that he exists to God, you know, very beautiful. But then like, so the novel is really grappling with like the heart, like longing for God in this very rich way, but he himself doesn't really believe it, the author, and it's complex. But he had a son very late in life, and whom he really loves, and you can see it pouring out in this book. because there's this beautiful scene where they're sort of walking along this abandoned road post the apocalypse. Everybody's dead except for people who want to kill them and like all this. And he's like pushing a shopping cart or something full of their belongings and everything. And his son, who's like 8 or something, he's a boy, is walking ahead of him. And he sees him in his mind become like a tabernacle. And he says, "If my son is not the word of God, then God never spoke."
Oh, God, that's amazing.
And this, I think, is a very rich understanding of how fatherhood works. You know, like we on the babies episode, I quoted this beautiful passage from Chesterton talking, quote, in defense of babies, where he talks about like he unveils one of his very constant themes, which is the way in which the individual has to discover for himself or herself like the perpetual glory and newness of the world, and it's made new by this person discovering it. I think that's what's happening. One thing that's happening there, like he is right. He's actually right to say that, you know, like if his son is not the word of God for him, like God never spoke.
Yeah.
That there is a word being spoken here so deep that a father has to be able to hear it.
It's so funny that you're bringing up the road. I'm scrolling through my phone right now to find an old message from him because, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my own father, who's a great man and an amazing influence on me. But you mentioned the road, and one of my kind of secondary father figures, and the man who was my first artistic mentor, was a guy who actually was in the movie adaptation of The Road.
Was he really? That's a good movie. It was a really good movie.
He plays one of the cannibals.
Nice. That's actually almost every character in the film, so that's not really narrowing it down, but good.
No. But he's one of like the big truck cannibals, and he was a professional stuntman and a mime, and I was like a very scared little nervous nerdy little homeschooled kid, and my mom just wanted me desperately to be able to make friends and like get socialized, and so she put me in the first of many theater classes where I sort of became who I am. And the first one was this introduction to stage combat class taught by Sean, and my mother must have had a stroke, like dropping me off, because this dude walks in a skull sweatshirt, the classic sort of like punk dad thing where he's like completely balding, but then his hair is down to his shoulders.
Amazing.
You know, crazy beard. You know, just kind of looks like heroin came to life and joined a pirate ship. And just walks in with like juggling balls and a sword. It's like, okay, yeah, let's go. Let's do this. Yeah, man. All right.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Totally defeated my mom's whole hope for me making friends, because by the second class, everyone had dropped out but me.
Oh my gosh, but this sounds like the best class ever. What the heck?
Well, because Sean, God bless him, like I think actually went to the people who ran a theater school and was like, hey, I think this kid needs it. Like, would you mind just letting me just keep doing this class?
That's really cool.
With
That's
just
really
this
splendid,
one kid. And he like Cormac McCarthy was a fallen away Catholic. And I was like 13 or 14, maybe 15 by the time we were done. And he was like totally willing to talk about faith with me as an equal. And just ask me about my Catholicism and explain like his own struggles with it, but not enforce his struggles on me, and talk about what it was to like feel like a nerd and all these things. And he just has the dumbest story. He passed away a few years ago. When I was living in Cincinnati, he passed away, and I had to drive back for his funeral, and it was just so amazing. It was the weirdest funeral I've ever been to, because it was just filled with people who professionally worked as pirates at Renaissance festivals across the country.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. And children who his life had touched.
Wow.
And of so many ages. I mean, people like me who were adults and high schoolers presently and middle schoolers presently. And um, it was a Christian, one of these evangelical churches, but they sang Kermit the Frog's Rainbow Connection, as like a hymn. But he had this real sort of Abraham coming out of Ur thing where he like had been working in insurance and had gone to Vegas and seen the pirate show at Treasure Island and just gave up everything. Like just came home and just said, I'm living a lie. I need to be a pirate. And just went to a French stunt school and a mime school and just gave himself over to this. And instead of doing what so many other artists do, which is going out to Hollywood and like trying to make it work, he didn't even try that. He just came back to Pittsburgh and was like, and now I'm going to help kids do this so they don't have to waste as much time as I did.
Wow.
And I just will never not be a product of Sean. And I hope to be as good a dad as he was a teacher.
Yeah.
Because I want to give myself over to the craft of my kid that way.
Yeah.
And carve away like that. And he helped me carve away my nerdiness. And I mean, obviously I'm still a giant dork, so he didn't do a great job, but
I think it's a partial work.
But partial, the bad stuff. And yeah, I just hope I can do that too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think it's exactly right. It's funny, we were laughing earlier about like the kind of like I throw out the textbook and I'ma learn from you. Woo, but there is something very genuine about the way that like real fatherhood I think works by this like real encounter with the other person that is like this is how like the generation of life really works, is that it's not just that I have something that you need and I'm going to impart it or bestow it upon you or make you have it. It's that like by caring about you enough, by loving you enough, we're gonna explore this thing together, and we really are. Like it really is also my exploration, I mean, in this, like, you don't know how to do stunt acting, and he does, and so you are legit, or stunt violence or whatever it was, but so you are legitimately acquiring skills that he has infinitely better. But at the same time, he has to like also encounter this experience of learning this for the first time and what was it like, and seeing it in you, and seeing the way in which this can give life, and why it's not just to have a set of skills to be sort of like absorbed and then move on to the next thing, but that it is actually,
it's not an assembly line.
It's not an assembly line, and that like, and look, I mean, listen, what we're talking about. We're talking about like mime skills and stunt action skills. I mean, these things, too.
I'm learning how to pull someone across the floor by their hair, but it doesn't hurt. Yeah. So this is a great real world applicability.
I'm so envious of that, by the way. But
wait, are you envious of the skill or envious of the hair?
Crap. Both. Hey, I got beards. Kind
of getting you back for the puberty comment 2 episodes ago.
Oh man, long memory. And but yeah, I think that's really it though. Like you also have to like dive into it and like love it, and that you see like the whole thing is a labor of is a work of love. Yeah, and that's kind of how fatherhood is by its nature. That it's this perpetual relationship of love, in which everything that we encounter becomes a way in which we generate like life and life more abundant.
I'm just curious, I'm talking about Sean, and I, of course, am giving a brief tip of my hat, although it's way too brief, to my own dad. And, you've told me both on air and off air about some of these, priests that you've gotten to work with. You've told me a little bit about your dad. I'm just curious, who or what experiences and what men have helped you in your own present understanding of your priestly dadhood? Like, both in terms of how you experienced it from your own dad or other priests, because again, this is just something that I don't think I've gotten to talk to a lot of priests about, and I just want to understand better your own journey with. It's reductive to call it the feeling of being a dad, but I'm sure you had to have felt at some point the feeling of being a son to one of these priestly dads,
Right.
or spiritual dads in some broader context, the way Sean was to me, or
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely very much the priest in the Dominican who was campus minister at Columbia when I was there. Is ultimately like the reason why I'm a Dominican in the first place. And
is
I
this
think it was,
before or after your conversion, or when is this?
I was already a Catholic at the point. Yeah, I was already
Okay.
Catholic.
Okay.
But I think what one way of putting what I was able to receive from him was that gift actually of spiritual fatherhood, of like that, like life and life more abundant, where I kind of, in a lot of ways, sort of thought that my life was fine. It was going fine, that I had a relationship with Christ that was fine and everything was great. But that it wasn't, that like, all of this stuff was autobiographical, like being very bound up in things that didn't need to be there, and not understanding, and like needing somebody to say yes actually to a bunch of things, and not to say no to a bunch of things, because the no's were what I was very familiar with, and the yeses was what I was not familiar with. And it's funny, just by like, I felt like he really lived this, like a lot of what I've been talking about, with an ideal of like fatherhood and priestly fatherhood, where with him you never really felt like, oh well, I got like an hour worth of Jesus stuff that I'm going to tell you about today, and we'll talk tomorrow, and I'll have another hour worth of Jesus stuff to tell you. It's just like, he loved Jesus Christ and thought that he was beautiful and wanted to talk about that. And whatever we were talking about, like somehow that was involved, somehow that was apparent, that we were talking about this and having these conversations and thinking about these things, even if we never mentioned God, because Christ was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And because that set me free somehow. And it really, like, it did kind of generate new life in me. I mean, it provoked a much deeper conversion, provoked this thing that ended up becoming my Dominican vocation and all. And I definitely like can see how I've received those gifts, yeah.
I love that. I love that also in maybe a selfish way, because I think it so perfectly helps me put a finger on what I've been trying to explain to people about this podcast too, which we've really grown in since joining with Catholic Creatives and our listenership, and we've had so many amazing and lovely comments from just people who I guess have really connected with it. And probably in a future episode, we're going to give some time to some of those, because they've been a lot to me and Father Gabriel to read. But we've also gotten a few very well-intentioned messages of like, oh, you should talk about this Catholic thing, or you should talk about that Catholic thing, or and not those are bad. I mean, some of those things are cool things to talk about. But what you're helping me put my finger on is I very much see anything we talk about on this podcast, or anything we talk about in our friendship, as kind of this beautiful meal that is served on the dinner plate of Christ, just necessarily. It's just gonna be, and your spiritual mentor and his just really passionate liking of Jesus, and just his love of Jesus, and how into it he was, filtering its way into everything else. The plate on which any topic was served on, whether, as we do on this podcast, are talking about, angels or Aqua Teen Hunger Force. And it's like, but guess what? Underneath that is a plate of Jesus, because that's just who we are. And that's the thing that we love the most. And how much that can change the meal to be served on that plate, and how much richer the meal is as a result of being served on that plate. How it goes from being takeout to a fine dining experience just because it's being served on that plate. And that makes so much sense to me that would come from him, because that is such a part of your vocation. I mean, again, it's the way I met you right at Frassati, and when you became my dad, right? When I come into Frassati, the scared, guy who's in a totally new town with no friends at all and a job that he absolutely hates.
Yay.
You just were the weirdest priest I'd ever met, because you were just showing photos of metal beams. Literally, you were just like, one day you were just showing photos of like metal beams in a museum, and you were like, tell me, is this guy a what was it, like a Pelagian heretic? And I'm like, it's metal beams, my guy. And
I don't know what to tell you.
yeah, but you just liked shit so hard, and it just grouped a bunch of people around you, and it made a lot of people. I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass here, but it made a lot of people who were on the edge of not being Catholic anymore Catholic again.
That's awesome.
Because you just liked looking at metal beams for an hour.
Yeah. Because they're, when they're worth it, they're worth it. What can I say? It's, not every metal beam is worth looking at, but when they're worth it, they're worth it.
Yeah. And sometimes they're heretic beams.
Unless they're manifesting a dangerous heresy. Question mark. It's, you're right. I mean, I think this is the calling, right? Is like, again, it's like life and life more abundant, right? And I think here we see this like really beautiful tie-in with artists and creatives of every kind. Is like it's this invitation to see, an invitation to share. Like, in some ways, I'm making this thing because I want you to have life and life more abundant. Might not be a very direct thing. It doesn't have to be like slavishly whatever, but like, but in some way, this contributes to like the unveiling of the world as a place where I have life and life abundant. And this is it, this is how we live as fathers. It's how, each in his or her appropriate way is supposed to share, in living as a creative, as living as an artist. And it's how we go to God, it's our great vocation. So with that, I'd say go forth and create cool things.
You've been listening to Creative Things, a podcast of Catholic creatives, hosted by Father Gabriel Toretta OP and Jacob Flores Popchek, produced by Jessica Flores Popchek and Kyle Meineke. To find out more about how you can support the podcast and other ventures for artists, visit catholiccreatives.org/support.